Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm so excited tonight to introduce to you Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber. He really needs no introduction from me. Impresario and composer extraordinaire, he's written some of the world's best-loved musicals, from Jesus Christ Superstar to Cats, from Phantom of the Opera to School of Rock. He's held audiences spellbound for decades. Described by the New York Times as the most commercially successful composer in history, Andrew has won multiple awards and written countless songs that we all know and love. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His shows play all over the world, breaking records as they go, and yet he continues to produce amazing musicals. His latest, Cinderella, was scheduled to open last month, but for reasons we hear about all too often these days, it's had to be postponed. So Andrew, here you are. Tell us a little bit about the reason for the postponement of Cinderella and where you are in terms of that. I hear you've been mixing that soundtrack today, you were telling me.
Well, yes, of course. I think we all know the reason for the postponement. I'm afraid it's the virus. And when you say my musicals play all over the world, I think the word played might be more appropriate. Although they are still playing in South Korea, who seem to be a lot more ahead about the virus than we are. And they're playing in Japan now to full audiences again, who seem to be again more ahead about how to test and trace and do the things that we don't seem to be terribly good at. But the reason I'm doing the Cinderella album at the moment is simply because I can't get it on. And it's a strange thing for me because it is almost to the day 50 years since the album of Jesus Christ Superstar was issued. And the reason why the album of Jesus Christ Superstar Jesus Christ Superstar was issued as an album first was because I couldn't get it on stage. And that was because nobody wanted to put it on stage because they thought it was a terrible idea. And we managed to get a record company to agree to put it out first. And here I am, not able to get my musical on stage for a completely different reason. And I decided in lockdown to see whether we could record great chunks of it at home. And we are now desperately trying to finish it in case we get to a second lockdown.
Mm-hmm. And you're at home in London or at home in Sidmonton?
Well, I'm not at home. I mean, I produced it at home at Sidmonton. I took my tiny young music team and hold them all up with me. So that was a very good way of spending lockdown. Anyway, now at the moment, I'm in London in my office next door to the Theatre Roger Lane, where we are, of course, right in the middle of a huge restoration and I don't know how to put it really, it's not exactly a refurbishment nor is it exactly a redevelopment, but it's restoring the theatre back to its incredible original state when it was designed by Benjamin Wyatt, but also rebuilding the auditorium, which was added onto it a lot later and was a little less successful.
You were telling me that of all the bad sides of the COVID-19 virus, that your ability to renovate the theatres is a positive that's come out of that.
Yeah, I mean, we heard first, as I expect an awful lot of you who are watching this heard about the virus really in January. My friends in Korea were contacting us and saying this is going to get very, very serious. And we knew at the beginning of February that it was not going to be easy for us to really stay open. I mean, we pretty much made a gamble about that and took a gamble that the thing to do was, obviously with the Theatre Roger Lane, we were way into the program about the restoration of that building anyway, but we decided that what we were going to do was to see if we did get locked down, whether we could continue to do or instigate construction in some of the other theatres and do some of the things that we've always wanted to do, which it's very difficult to do if you've got a show running. One of the big things which my wife is passionate about is the introduction of ladies' loos. So there are more ladies' loos now going into buildings that we seem to be responsible for than I've ever seen. We are reconstructing and have reconstructed the Gillian Lynn Theatre, which was the New London where Cats played and was renamed after Gilly in her honor because she was the choreographer of Cats and such a huge part of its success. And then we've been now involved with the reconstruction of Her Majesty's, reconstruction is the wrong word, but we're doing a lot of renovation there. So it's been an opportunity to do things, but the most important thing I felt was to keep going. I'm a passionate believer that you've got to find solutions and not moan all the time about things that are maybe difficult, but things that you really feel that, I mean, I've been so lucky with my theatre career that I passionately believe that the one thing that I had to do was to keep everything going as much as I possibly could, and to fight for theatre where I possibly could.
We're getting lots of questions in, got 7 already. And in the audience, if you could A, put your question in, and B, upvote them, so it makes it easier for me to pick them. There's Georgina Morris is saying, thank you for giving up your time for us tonight. I'm a final year medical student, soprano and musical theatre enthusiast. Very excited to see our theatres reopening. Which of your productions has been your favourite over the years, and which do you most look forward to restaging? That's quite interesting.
I don't really have a favorite production, because I always feel that all my shows are sort of in a way like children. I mean, I have to say that I think Hal Prince's production of Evita was amazing, and of course his production of Phantom of the Opera was extraordinary. And so it's very, very important to me to get Phantom back up again, because in many ways that is one of those rare occasions, like it was with Evita, like it is very, very rarely in musicals, and it does happen infrequently, where every aspect of the production comes together in a way that is extraordinary, that the design, which in Phantom's case was by Maria Bjornsson, and the design absolutely fitted the music. Hal's production totally fitted what I wrote. We were completely in tandem. It doesn't happen that often. I'd say Phantom is an example of when I was lucky enough for it to happen. It happened obviously with The Lion King. It's obviously happened with Hamilton. But it doesn't happen all that often. Once in a generation, you can almost say, with luck.
Reading your excellent autobiography, Unmasked, I've been doing that today.
I call it a doorstop. It's far too long.
I think it's just full of fantastic stories. But I mean, it's starting at the beginning. You were probably destined to be a musical impresario from a very young age, coming from a musical family with your brother Julian and your father William and so on. I mean, just talk us a little bit. What was your first big moment as a musician? Was it at school when you, as you describe in the?
I obviously think that first and foremost I'm a composer, and I love composing for musical theatre. And in a way, the role I've taken on as a theatre owner, as a producer, is, in the case of producing, is to try and keep the quality of my work up as high as it possibly can be. But as a theatre owner, it's to put something back into the profession that I love. So I regard myself really as a composer. But coming back to your question, I guess I realized really that I was fascinated by theatre very, very early on. I mean, music was obviously a very big part of my life. My father was the director of the London College of Music. He was also the professor of composition at the Royal College of Music. So music was absolutely around me and the family all the time. And my father was extremely, how can I say, Catholic with a small c in his tastes. I mean, he allowed all forms of music into the house. And he very much, I think, subscribed to the view that there are only two kinds of music, good and bad. And so he didn't mind it when I started bringing in pop and rock music. And he certainly didn't mind when I was bringing in, he was rather surprised, I think, that I developed a love which was rather different to most people in my age, also for musicals, and particularly Rodgers and Hammerstein. So I just knew when I was I had two loves in my life when I was a boy. One was architecture, which started off as a love of, funnily enough, ruined buildings, but developed into castles and abbeys and things like that, but developed into a love of architecture in general. And visual things, therefore, have always hugely affected me. But somehow theatre also overtook. And I was lucky enough that an awful lot of things were happening when I was very, very young. I had an aunt who was an actress, and she'd retired, but she became sort of one of the first ever celebrity TV kind of cooks, I suppose. And she wrote cookbooks and things, and she was frightfully glamorous to me, you know, because she knew people in the theatre. And I don't know, I mean, it sort of all overtook me. So by the time I was sort of 10 years old, I had the luck of seeing My Fair Lady. I'd seen West Side Story in the theatre. I'd seen the movie of Gigi. I'd seen the movie of South Pacific, all in one gap and one sort of school holidays. And I'm afraid I was hooked.
Mm-hmm. And then you know your teaming up with Tim Rice was obviously influential in terms of Joseph, and then Jesus Christ Superstar, and the two were kind of into those two projects. I mean, I know you and Tim have had a relationship that's sort of been fluctuating in a way, but anything to say about Tim?
Well,
In
he's
that?
a very, very talented lyricist indeed. I mean, I always hoped, rather like that with Rodgers and Hammerstein, that I'd write with him for a very long time. In fact, the last show we wrote together was Evita, and that was 1976, where we have done little bits and pieces since, but we haven't written another show together, which I'm sad about in many ways. But my great love is musical theatre, and therefore I just want to get on. And so I'm afraid I work at a pace that is perhaps not everybody's. And so I mean, I'm already thinking, oh gosh, I've written Cinderella. It should have been on stage 2 weeks ago. Got to get the album out. We're mixing that because it's force majeure. Got to mix that. What is going to be the next thing that I do? And I'm now already looking around for the subject that I want to write next, because one of the great pieces of advice that was given to me by Harold Prince came from George Abbott, who was a legendary figure of American theatre, American musical theatre, who I did meet when he was 101. What George Abbott said was, when you finished a musical, make sure you've got a meeting the next morning about the next one.
Well, you describe yourself in the book as a perfectionist, but I mean, workaholic might be another way to describe you, Andrew. I mean, do you think are you driven to do these things? Do you think you're like compelled to?
Yeah, I think so, because I'm so lucky. I enjoy it so much. I love musical theatre, and I love to see it. Love to see the way it's developing. I love to see the new writers coming through. I'm thrilled at the success of Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen and all of the new writers who are coming through from America. I mean, who I know, they're sort of friends, because I think the people who are successful creators in musical theatre, not so sure about the producers, but I think the creators of musical theatre, we all really, really want to see each other succeed. And I think we all do realize, that we all bounce off each other. I think for a long period of time, I mean, there was a time in the 70s and perhaps in the 80s where really there weren't that many new writers coming up at all. In fact, there were none. And it's really been exciting to see, for example, a little musical like Six come through from, in the last 2-3 years. It's just exciting when there's a lot going on. I mean, I'd have loved to have been around in the 1950s when you had, say, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein writing, you had Frank Loesser writing, you had West Side Story happening, you had all of the people, all of the shows that were happening on Broadway then. It would have been a thrilling time to have been about.
Yeah, well, we've got a load of questions coming on. We're 26, so I'm not going to be able to get through them all. I'll pick one. Peter Borg Bartolo says it's said that music and mathematics are complementary. Do you agree with that? And do you enjoy mathematics? Are you a mathematician as well as a musician?
Difficult question for me to answer in one sense, because I'm useless at maths, but I do completely understand the mathematics involved with music. In the sense that time signatures are very important, the sense that you can analyze music, and you can look at it mathematically. And I'm also a great believer in construction in musical theatre. And by that I mean the dramatic construction, not just the score, but also the plot itself. So therefore, I can absolutely see the connection between certainly musical theatre and music and maths. I mean, there's no question that, say, a composer like Prokofiev was a brilliant mathematician, and he was also a brilliant melodist. But I don't really think of myself as a mathematician, although I do completely get the point about music and maths.
Mm. There's a question from Tom Myerscough, which is, I think it's from Mary, actually. It must be his partner. I've read you mentioned your production of Phantom had a lengthy run in Seoul at the moment with a capacity audience, in spite of the COVID-19 restrictions. Can you tell us how the practical innovations, how that was done, and what were the reasons for the London Palladium's recent refusal to borrow similar technical adjustments? I mean,
The London Palladium has adopted all of those, all of those. So I don't quite understand that.
Yeah. Let's move then to Maya Jacobs. She said, what do you say about the government's suggestion that musicians should retrain in the face of COVID?
Well, I mean, I don't think it varies on who you talk to. Did they actually say that?
Well, there was an advertisement that.
Oh, there was the ad about a ballet dancer. Yes. Well, I mean, that's.
I think it's a reference to that. Yeah.
I think Oliver Dowden did automatically. I mean, well, immediately disown it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think I can't believe the government really believes that.
I think they're on the back foot in all ways at the moment. I feel sorry for them having to deal with it. So Merlin Wilcox says, my daughter's going to an audition for a singing contest. She's going to sing Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again. What advice do you have for her? That's
oh gosh, sing it from the heart. It's and I'm assuming she's a soprano, and don't feel that you have to oversing it, because it's a song about a young girl wishing that her father was here again, and it's not meant to be a huge, great operatic soprano aria. It just needs to be sung rather beautifully and rather tenderly.
So, Andrew, in your book, you talk about various epiphanies, you know, which gave you the inspiration for some of your shows, which are so well loved. Evita and Phantom in particular. I think you say in the book that you were at the Judy Garland show, which they made into a movie, didn't they, last year, where she was sort of at the very end of her career and a bit the worse for wear. And of course, dear old Amy was in the same situation. I mean, is that how your musical start? Is it a sudden idea that comes into your head, one tune, and then you build on it? Talk us through the construction of some of your very well-loved production musicals.
Well, coming back to Judy Garland, it just happened that through my aunt, I knew the director of Judy Garland's last movie, which was called I Could Go On Singing, a guy called Ronald Neame. Therefore, I went to go and see Judy Garland in the Talk of the Town. And I think it was the last performance she ever gave, or rather never gave, because she was very late, and she came on stage and tried to sing Over the Rainbow, and it was one of the most dreadful moments I've ever seen, apart from seeing Amy Winehouse in a very similar situation. And it was like, you know, the audience was so hostile to her, and they were just so unprepared for the fact she was late for a start, and they just so unprepared to want her to succeed. And, you know, they were probably had a few. It was the Talk of the Town, the old Hippodrome Talk of the Town. So it was a dinner theatre. So she was late. They'd all had a few. And it was one of the most awful sights I ever remember seeing, because there she was, this extraordinary little bird, you know, who was singing Over the Rainbow, her anthem. And it was like she was being crushed in front of us. And I'll never forget it. The movie portrays it very, very differently. They portray it that the audience sort of started to sing along, and then she reacted, and then that didn't happen the night I saw her anyway. May have done another one. But anyway, when I was thinking about how could I write Evita, which was an idea that Tim Rice had, which is the story of Eva Peron, she died very young, and I thought, I mean, how do I find a way in to do this musically? And I thought back to that Garland concert and thought, if I could find an anthem that she sings when she's really at the height of her power, or the height of her success, and then it turns round as she's dying and she tries to sing it again and it crushes her, then I found the key to how to do this for Tim. And anyway, that's how I came up with Don't Cry For Me, Argentina.
Peter Wisniewski says, outside your own musicals, which musical would be the one that you wish you'd written? I know you talked a little bit about your influences.
An awful lot I wish I could have written, or I wish I had written. I think South Pacific, West Side Story, My Fair Lady, probably Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton's, yes, that's that's absolutely right. The so tell us a little bit about how the idea for Phantom came about, Andrew. That's probably, well, I mean, it's hard to pick amongst all your successes which is the most successful. That's certainly run an incredible time, hasn't it, all over the world?
Yeah, I mean, Phantom has been an extraordinary one for me. It came about a rather odd way. When I was married to Sarah Brightman, actually before we were married, somebody came to her and said that they had an idea that they wanted to do a musical of the old Gaston Leroux, The Phantom of the Opera. And they wanted to do it as a sort of comedy with operatic arias, but existing operatic arias. So they were going to put in bits of, I guess, Verdi, Puccini, whoever. And anyway, Sarah wasn't that keen, but I had obviously brought Cameron Mackintosh, into my fold, as it were, when I asked him if he would like to do Cats with me. And he and I sort of kept talking about other projects. And I said to Cameron, would this be something that would be interesting for us to produce maybe together? And we had a couple of meetings with a guy called Ken Hill, whose idea it was. And it was in fact done at the Joan Littlewood Theatre, the Stratford Royal, the Stratford Theatre Royal in East London. And anyway, we decided that it really wasn't for us. And it came on and it went, and it was a comedy. And fine, forgot about it. A year later, I was in New York and I came across the novel of the Gaston Leroux, but the original Gaston Leroux novel, sitting around in a bookstall in the street. And I just thought to myself, I'll buy this. And I had nothing very much to do. Read it that evening and thought, this is something radically different. There's a very confused book here with a lot of ideas. Couldn't make its mind up whether it was a detective story, whether or not it was a thriller, whether or not it was a historical novel, whether or not it was a high romance. But it was the high romance that got me. And I'd never seen a version of The Phantom of the Opera that was a high romance. And coupled with a lot of other things that had gone on, in my life, a lot of other things that, were around at the time. The image of somebody I remember whose face had been incredibly burnt in the Falklands War, things like that. I thought there's something in The Phantom of the Opera that is really exciting. And I started to write it myself. I spoke to Hal Prince, who I knew through Evita, and really cutting a long story short, it evolved from there.
Well, Spiros Papazoglu, if I pronounce that right, probably didn't, says The Phantom of the Opera is just the best opera of this century, and a great way to enter the new century. So he loves you. There's a question here about the film that they made of Cats, Andrew. The most recent one, I think, was it Working Title Films made that? And I know you made some negative comments about that, because I mean, that's the issue of making your theatrical productions into films. Obviously, it's not always easy. They don't always come off, and you probably don't have much control over it, or do you?
I think I'd have a lot more control over things now than I did then. I mean, Cats was a very, very big success back in the early 1980s. And Steven Spielberg, who was obviously really at the height of everything then, he came to me and said he wanted to make a movie of it. And who was I to argue with Steven Spielberg? So it was sold to basically his company, and then which was owned by Universal Pictures, but it was never made. And the foolish mistake that we made was that we didn't have any kind of clause after a period of time that it would revert to us. Anyway, I just thought there were lots of ideas about making it an animated movie. There was a screenplay even written by Tom Stoppard, which I've still got, quite an interesting one, as an animated film, but nothing ever happened with it. And it was forgotten about, frankly. And then suddenly I got a contact from, I guess it must have been Working Title, to say that Tom Hooper, who directed Les Miserables, was wanting to make a movie out of Cats. And I thought, fine, but little did I know that the movie, which I had absolutely no real involvement with at all, was going to really not turn out right, because I'm afraid the people involved with it were not interested in listening to any of the people who had been involved with the original stage show. And that was really including me. And the only reason they had to talk to me was I did have some approvals over the music. So when the choreographer, Wayne McGregor, brilliant choreographer, walked from the movie over 2 years ago, I wrote to Universal Pictures and to a working title, and I said, these are the reasons why this movie is going to turn into a car crash unless you do something about it. And they didn't even reply to me. So that's all I have to say about the movie of Cats.
Well, on a different note, Nicholas Balois says Joel Schumacher passed away last year. What was it like to work with him on the film adaptation of Phantom?
Joel was great fun. He was a lovely, lovely guy. He was one of the most amusing people you could ever have the fortune of having dinner with. Tunny, full of life, it was a sad thing. He died. I mean, he didn't really direct anything very much after Phantom, and I think Phantom was really not a bad movie at all. I think my feeling is that I'm a theatre animal, though, and if I ever was to be involved with a movie myself, I think I'd really rather it was an original movie that I perhaps had been involved with it from the word go and conceived it as a movie, rather than taking something from the theatre and adapting it. Having said that, there are shows of mine that I would love to see, like Sunset Boulevard. I mean, we have hopes that maybe there will be one day a movie of it with Glenn Close. And that is something I'd want to be very much involved with, because Glenn is a fabulous actress, and apart from being a friend of mine. And again, it's like everything. It's how many hours are there in the day? I mean, I'm at the moment, I really want to get my Cinderella on stage. I want to get writing another show again after that. Sometimes the problem is that you have to let things go. And I think when it comes to film, when you, at my age, and I'm 72 now, you have to sort of prioritize a bit. And I think maybe what I should really be prioritizing on is writing.
Yeah. Well, Sonia Abraham's got a suggestion. She says she loved the film Evita, and so did I. But she says, Andrew, you're the same age as the NHS. Would you consider doing a musical theatre play based on the National Health Service?
It would be a vast international success. But I mean, I think we have to say our NHS is an extraordinary thing. And it is an amazing thing, isn't it? That when you consider that one of the problems that American actors have, at the moment is that very few of them have any kind of health insurance, and there's no NHS in America. So and the NHS is a wonderful, wonderful, wondrous thing, but I'm not even sure that any musical would do justice to it.
No, I think you're right. Well, of course, they got a big mention in the London Olympic Games. Sonia likes Jesus Christ Superstar movie too. So this is a good one. Ian Rickard says, you mentioned Amy Winehouse. I'm always saddened when a death like Amy's occurs. Are there any particular practitioners you turn to in the business when you want to help folk in difficulty, which kind of leads on to the amazing stuff you've done in the world of charity, including your own foundation and War Child and Prostate Cancer UK too. You help, Andrew. So when you see somebody in trouble like Amy, I mean, what can be done? And then tell us a little bit about all your great charitable works.
With Amy Winehouse, I mean, I never knew her at all. But I know somebody who really, really seriously did. And I think everything that was possible to be done for her was, but there were so many circumstances there that made the whole thing desperately sad. And she's one example of a really, really major talent who just, I'm afraid, just was lost. I mean, I saw her in Birmingham in one of her last concerts, and I thought she was extraordinary, but rather like the audience turned on poor old Judy Garland, they turned on her that night, and she responded in the one way that you should not do in that kind of occasion, which is that she went back at the audience. And of course, that goaded the audience on, and it was not a good night at all. But there were flashes of something quite extraordinary there. I wonder what would have happened if she had lived. I think she had such a talent that it could have gone into a huge number of different ways. And no, I don't really have any involvement, I'm afraid, with people who deal with people in that sort of situation. But my foundation has been involved with a large number of projects, one of which has always been very dear to my heart, which is music in schools. And that slightly touches on the area we're talking about, because one of the things that really has impressed me over the years is that where schools have hugely embraced music, then an awful lot of the behavior problems that they may have had with their pupils, a lot of the problems that may happen with drugs, may happen with gangs, may happen, disappear. One of the schools that I first visited where music had become a vital part of their life, the life of the school, was a school in Highbury in London. And there, every child was given a free violin when they arrived by the Wilson Foundation, which is a fantastic thing. And consequence of that is that these kids started to learn music, and they got a weekly music tuition lesson. Very often, the violin was the very first thing of any value these kids had. Now, this school, I thought, had 46 different languages spoken in it. I'm told now by the head teacher there that I underestimated that somewhat. It was over 60 languages that were spoken there, and music was the common denominator. And I was so incredibly impressed by a concert that I went to with my brother Julian, the cellist. I went with him. I was so impressed that I said that my foundation must get involved with rolling this program out. So we now have 8,000 children. Well, now I suppose don't, because with everything that's been going on with COVID and everything, but where everything to be normal, we would have had 8,000 children this year getting free music lessons every week. And the results that you find from everything to do with behavior to academic achievement, through in any area of life, you really want to talk about, where music has enhanced that area of life. And I find it not only moving, but an incredibly important message to government, because when you're talking all the time, oh, we need extra policemen, we need extra people on the beat or something. And if you can find out that actually giving children a free music lesson means that you have to have fewer policemen on the beat, it's good news, isn't it?
It is, and I'm afraid that music teaching in schools, it has reduced. The other thing your charity did was to encourage diversity way back.
One of the things we have is scholarships as well to the various, obviously the stage schools and various music colleges around the country, as well as supporting projects that my trustees, I'm not one of my trustees because I think I don't want to influence them. I feel that it's a good idea to let them get on because they're very, very good at all of this. But they do know my feelings. And I think that it's incredibly important that we realize that we're talking about diversity. It isn't actually about necessarily only encouraging kids who come from different backgrounds to come into theatre or whatever as actors or whatever, but it's about the wherewithal for them to be able to enter the profession in various ways, be it backstage, be it lighting designers, be it as stage managers, be it, on the business side of it, who knows? But one of the things we therefore commissioned was a report into diversity and how easy was it for people to get into theatre. And we found that it wasn't so much a question of anybody wanting to put up a barrier about people getting into theatre, but nobody really knew how to. And therefore, with the Stage newspaper, we've been very much supporting a project which is about bringing people into and allowing young people from all backgrounds to come into theatre. And I think that's a vital thing. But I think when one talks about diversity, one of the things I have noticed is that, frankly, you say, or you issue a report, or we talk about something like this, but I do find that some of the colleagues in theatre who wring their hands about it, I wish they'd do a little bit more themselves, because there are many of us and who have had the luck of the kind of success within theatre that we've all dreamt about. And I do think it's vitally important that we give back. If you don't give back, and if you've been lucky enough in life, as I have been, to know what I wanted to do, to have been able to make a living out of it, and then make the kind of living that I have that has allowed me to indulge myself in so many things that I hold dear, I think it is absolutely imperative that you give back. And I do wish that people in theatre, some of the people who have been successful, would stop wringing their hands and saying, oh, we need more diversity in theatre, and actually do something about it.
Well, Hannah Panton's got a good question. And she says, I've often heard that failure helps us to succeed. Have you any failures in your career that you can share with us? That's a slightly cheeky question, perhaps.
No, it's not a cheeky question at all. It's an extremely good question. And the answer is yes. I had a dreadful flop musical called Jeeves very early on in my career, and I learned an awful lot from it. One of the things was that Harold Prince came to go and see it. And he said that the sets were the ugliest sets he'd ever seen. And he said something to me, which was really interesting. He said that you can't listen to music if you can't look at it. Now think about that. You think about the number of opera productions that you may have gone and seen in your life, and it may have been your favorite opera, and you suddenly thought, God, I had an awful evening. Then you've gone to that same opera and you thought, I've had a fabulous evening, and it'll all be down to the production. That brings me back to what I said earlier about, the production must fit the work like a glove. But it is incredibly important to remember that the things that don't work, they of many things that don't work have got ingredients in them that would have worked if all of the other ingredients had been right. I mean, one of the things I learned very on in musicals, and if you're talking about failure in my particular world, it very much is that musicals are an incredibly collaborative form. And it's not just me, I'm the composer, but it's the story, it's the lyrics, it's the choreography, it's the direction, it's the look of the show, it's the lighting, it's the performers. And if any one of those areas are wrong, then the show may very well be derailed and you never hear of it again.
You, of course, are so involved in A, the concept, B, the musical creation, but also in the actual direction and you sit in and watch them rehearse. And also, I was going to ask you about talking of failure. You were the first person, I think, Andrew, to be involved. Maybe it was your idea. The audience vote for the stars that you put on your production, and I think there's one that I particularly love, Jessie Buckley, who was sort of pipped at the post. I mean, any thoughts about that? Of course, she's done terribly well now, Jessie Buckley. She's done amazing movies, and she's very, very musical too. So, is it a good thing to let the audience decide who's going to be your lead? Can they decide better than you? And do they make mistakes? And
the shows I did now, them started nearly 20 years ago, and so the last one I did was sort of 15 years ago. They were great because they got an audience back into theatre again that perhaps had sort of forgotten about musicals, and it was the beginning of something that was really very, very exciting. And not only that, I enjoyed doing it because we had a completely different mantra because I guess they were BBC programs, we were allowed to not think of them as sort of pure light entertainment programs, although they were. Our mantra was that we nurture, we don't torture. And so it was always a great joy to see the artist coming through. And I think we had a pretty extraordinary success rate. And I think the audience always really voted for the person who they really believed would be right for the role. Which is one of the reasons why I after we did, frankly, after we did Jesus Christ Superstar, that was for ITV, but after we did The Wizard of Oz for the BBC, I didn't really feel that I could go on because how many more could I do anyway? And also, you've got to find a subject that the audience has a view about. So there are a lot of musicals that probably a lot of people listening to this now would have views about, but the public might not. When it came to Oliver, which was the one which Jessie Buckley came second in, Jodie Prenger won it. And I think as far as the public's concerned, and I mean, Jodie is a wonderfully warm, wonderfully talented artist. She probably was the right choice, I think, for Nancy and Oliver. With Jessie Buckley, we had something very, very special and very, very, very separate, I think, to any of the other performers I've had, although that that series produced an extraordinary crop of girls. I mean, we had Samantha Bach, of course, you know, who was in Les Miserables, and then you know, just starred in Pretty Woman on Broadway, and she's become a big star in America. Jessie did The Man That Got Away, thinking of Judy Garland, something that I had to fight to get the BBC people to let her do. They said, well, this is not a pop song, people might not know it. And I said, it'll be fantastic. And Jessie, I think, gave the finest performance that I can remember of any young girl on any TV show of that kind that I've ever seen anyway. And I think in many, many ways, what happened on that show was the making of Jessie, because if she'd won it, I think it would have been wrong. And I think she knew it. I think I knew it. I think we all knew it. Because to have gone into Oliver would have probably been the wrong thing, because her career was richer than just being in musicals. And I think the fact that she then went to RADA, got a scholarship to RADA, she then went on, was playing opposite Jude Law in Henry V as the French Queen in that production, which Michael Grandage directed, and has gone on to have the kind of movie career. I just always remember Jessie saying to me, must be nearly 10 years ago now, saying, Andrew, I'm going to keep my voice under wraps until I'm ready. And when I prove myself as an actress, then I'll sing. And let me tell you something, that girl is one of the most talented, brilliant young actresses around today.
Well, I totally agree. I think she's absolutely wonderful. Roberta Quashi is saying, well, what do you think of the music climate today? And a kind of ancillary question to that, from what we were talking about a couple of days ago, you're saying your daughter is very much into social media. So, I mean, social media is changing everything. Is it going to change musical theatre as well?
I think my daughter is probably looking at this now and already kind of getting bits of it on TikTok or something. I don't know. But no, I think that there's no question that social media has changed how everybody thinks about how you promote shows and things. I mean, I'm an old idiot, you know. I mean, I don't know about all of this. But I found it pretty extraordinary that when we were all locked down together as a family, and my daughter Bella decided that she was going to get her old father into somehow social media shape, I started people saying to me, do you realize you got 25 million views of you doing this? And I said, really? So there you go. I mean, look, nothing is going to change the importance of the quality of work. How work is discovered, I think that will probably change over the years, as it always has done. But I think in a way, there's a remarkable opportunity for kids, because their work can get discovered now in a way that it couldn't when I started out. But it comes back to one thing. I remember when I first did Josie of the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat with Tim Rice. It was first performed on a wet Friday afternoon to a lot of bored parents at a school in West London called Collet Court. And Tim and I thought this was a bit of a come down from our hope that we'd one day open in the West End, and that this would be our first incarnation. But Joseph has gone on to become, I mean, one of the most successful musicals that I'd ever written. And Tim would say the same, from the smallest possible origin. Yeah. And that's why I say to anybody, you know, that it's important to get your work performed somewhere, and it will get picked up. And of course, today with social media, it's going to get picked up a lot quicker than it did in my time.
There's a question from Dr. Ramanathan. Could you tell us about your association with Indian Tamil music composer A.R. Rahman? Does that ring a bell?
It sure rings a bell. Just talking about him today, funnily enough.
Well, there you go.
Some years ago, there used to be on Saturday mornings, I think on Channel 4, they used to show Bollywood movies. And I used to kind of vaguely watch them, and people slightly made fun of them, I'm going to be honest. And I thought, oh God, some of this is really very, very good. And every time I heard a song sort of on in the distance when I was sort of making coffee or something, there seemed to be a common denominator, and it was this composer, A.R. Rahman. Now, everybody in India knows that, I mean, everybody in around the world now knows that he is probably arguably the most successful composer in the world at the moment. And I mean, and one of the reasons for this is that he writes the most incredible melodies. And I, as a composer, hearing these incredible tunes, which are not Western, yet to me, I mean, resonated in a way that, it's not like sort of Ravi Shankar, I mean, who is fine if you love the sitar and everything, but, they're not melodies like I think of melody. And I just thought, I have to meet this guy. And we met, we got on, and I said, I'd love to do a musical of or put together a kind of, almost like a kind of greatest hits of your work in London, and try and introduce it to a Western audience. And Bombay Dreams came on in London now, just over 20 years or more than that now ago. And it was a hit in London. It was a wonderful sight, really, because so many of the Indian community brought their friends eventually to see it, and a lot of the white friends were introduced to the music for the first time. It was a flop on Broadway, where people said, why on earth would I be introducing, and it quite clearly I'd lost my touch by introducing this sort of music to America, which was not right and tuneless. I remember it's the only time I ever wrote back to a critic and said, you are wrong, you mark my words. The A.R. Rahman will be a very, very big success in America too. And it was 3 years later that he won the Oscar for not just Best Song, but also Best Score for Slumdog Millionaire. He is a marvelous talent. We're hoping that there will be a movie made, based on Bombay Dreams. And today I was just talking with some other producers, because I don't feel I could do it again myself, but I was talking with other producers about how we could perhaps introduce his music again, but with a very much more contemporary slant with the plot plot-wise than we had before. He's a fabulous composer.
Jemima George says, how long does it take from your original idea, your epiphany of an idea for a musical, from that idea for the full composition and the script to be written?
Well, I always say that from the moment you think of a musical, it could be anything from 4 years to 4 years, 3 years, something like that, before you think it really gets on stage, because there are so many ingredients, as I said earlier, so many people you have to have involved with the show. And so you've got to wait till sometimes you get all of those together. But even if everything comes together really quickly, I think 3 years is a minimum. Right now, I would think probably 35 years looks like the minimum.
Tell us a little bit about Cinderella then, because that's your current project, and it was due to be launched, wasn't it? This
over 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But it hasn't. So I've been making the album, as I was saying, in lockdown, and we'll finish it. I doubt if it'll come out this year, but I think that maybe some of the songs will begin to. It's a very funny take on the story of Cinderella. It started because I was at a dinner. Again, it shows you how long ago these things take to come to fruition. It must be 5 years ago now that I was at a dinner with some major American TV executives. And they were all talking about what was the most successful thing ever in the history of American TV. And they were all saying it's Super Bowl and it's this, that, and the other. And I just said, well, hang on a moment. There was something else that was also very successful. It was Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella in 1956. And they looked at me as if it was really high time for me to put out to grass. And then they looked at what they Googled and looked at their phones and all of that. And then they said, oh my God, Andrew's right. In 1956, 120 million people watched Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. It's not a show that's really known here at all, because it was really done for American TV, obviously. Anyway, they all then said, we'd love you to do one. And so I got sent dreadful synopses about, we can kind of guess it. I mean, bringing it up to date in quite the wrong way. Forgot about it. Then I met a girl called Emerald Fennell, because I know her parents very well. Theo Fennell, the jeweler, is her father. And we were sort of having a kitchen supper at her parents' place. And I said that this had happened. And she, Emerald, has written the second series of Killing Eve. And she's a very, very, very successful young writer herself. She just directed her first movie, which again should have come out, but it hasn't because of lockdown and everything. She said, I'd like to have a crack. And she came up with this very, very alternative, funny story about Cinderella, which is the story exactly right, except that every beat happens in the same place, but everything is different. And I thought, I have to do this because it's not going to be like any Cinderella that anybody's seen before.
I'm just going to read out this compliment to you, Andrew. Graham Layer says, you're the handle of our day. We all admire you hugely. Do you see yourself moving to a different style as time moves on? Your legacy is extraordinary without peer. We've all grown up with you and are interested to know your favorite opera composer. Any thoughts about that? Who's your traditional opera composer?
Well, traditional operas, it's difficult because, again, I always like different things by different composers. I mean, one of the works that first really had a huge impact on me was Britain's Peter Grimes. I obviously love Puccini, but I'm not as aware of all of his operas. I'm not sure that I like all of them as much as I like Tosca a lot, but the plot is such a gruesome one when you actually know what it's doing. I first heard it when it was I heard it as a kid in Italian, and I loved the music. But the more I began to understand it, the less I actually liked it. But the music is fabulous. Verdi, of course, I mean, is the consummate opera composer as well. But I really am a musical theatre man, and at the end of the day, my favourite musical composer is Richard Rodgers. I think Richard Rodgers was extraordinary. I think his melodies are peerless. I think along with Paul McCartney and I get about A.R. Rahman in this actually, but and in Gershwin and Prokofiev, I think they would be my favorite composers really of, as it were, our time.
You didn't mention Wagner with his sort of operatic theatre.
I mean, I think with Wagner, I'm going to upset an awful lot of people by saying that, I love the overtures, but that's enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was actually, that kind of leads me on to the question somebody's posed, that there were some criticism of Jesus Christ Superstar saying it was anti-Semitic, but that's not, I couldn't see anything there myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't really see how it could remotely be anti-Semitic at all. I mean, it's the very last thing that Tim Rice and I thought about, and there's absolutely no way. It was something that was raised at one point by the Jewish Defense League in America, who were then prescribed at one point as a right-wing organization. So I really don't think that really is very relevant at all. The only thing I would say is that when Superstar was originally written, I mean, one of the first people to hear it was the chief rabbi in London, and he did say, that he thought that it was a wonderful way of looking at the story from, as it were, Judas Iscariot's point of view, which is the point of it. And that's what Tim Rice was really getting at, is that we were looking at, taking it from the point of view of the Bob Dylan line, did Judas Iscariot have God on his side? And I think that's where Tim was coming from.
It's nearly time to go, and we've had 88 questions, so I haven't had, I'm afraid, a chance to pose them all to you, Andrew, but thank you so much for joining us this evening. I was going to ask you to finish up with it because it's a medical show, this, and most of our audience are in the medical profession, or the healthcare profession anyway. You've been over in Oxford, I think, when I spoke to you, engaged in the Oxford vaccine trial against COVID. I mean, any thoughts about that? Do you think that there's a glimmer of hope for next year with this vaccine from Oxford?
Well, I'm sure everybody watching is far more qualified to have an opinion about that than I have. All I can say is that I very much wanted to be a part of the trial. I think it's very important that, if I'm banging on about getting people back into theatre again, that not only am I very interested in this sort of thing, but I think it's vital that you show that one's not frightened or concerned about trying a vaccine like this. And all I can say is that I've had absolutely no side effects from it whatsoever. And if anything, I felt a little bit more sort of flu-y after having my standard flu jab this year, but I have nothing and no reaction to the COVID jab at all.
Great. And hopefully you're more immune to COVID now than Donald Trump says he is on the radio, on the TV a couple of days ago. Andrew, it's nearly 8 o'clock, so I'd like to thank you so much. We could have had got enough questions to keep you going here for another 2 or 3 hours, but I bet you're going back to mixing your new album, Cinderella. So thank you so much. It's been a major privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
A nice little respite from the recording studio.
I just don't go. I just got a few announcements to make. Next week on this show, in conversation, we've got Francis Crook, who's talking about prison reform. The week after that, we have Dame Claire Marks, who heads up the GMC. And in November, Vanessa Redgrave will be joining us. So we're very excited about that. Tomorrow night, Jane McQuitty, wine correspondent of the Times. I know she'd like to ask Andrew some questions about his collection of wines, but we can't go there now. So do join us tomorrow evening, same time, 7 o'clock for Jane McQuitty. And thank you again, Andrew, for putting up with all those questions from doctors all over the UK and actually beyond the UK as well. So love to Madeline, love to all your family, and thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for everything that you've contributed. Amazing contribution to British culture.
Well,
Good
thank
night.
you very much, Roger. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.